Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
A new chapter begins with Donald Trump declaring the golden age of America starts right now. Thousands brave sub-zero temperatures here in Washington to witness history. As he leaves the White House, Joe Biden gives presidential pardons to members of his own family, worried about future politically motivated prosecutions. Among the inaugural guests, titans of tech, billionaires now more powerful than ever before.
I will very simply put America first.
He delights his supporters with a slew of measures on day one, including curbing immigration, more drilling for oil, and scrapping government diversity initiatives. And this is the scene live at the Capital One Arena, where President Trump is due to make an appearance.
In our other main news tonight, there's to be a public inquiry into the Southport attacks last July after a teenager pleads guilty to the murders of 3 girls he stabbed to death at a dance class. Alice Aguiar, Elsie Dot Stankham and B.B. King were killed by Axel Rudakubana in the attack. He also admitted the attempted murder of 8 other children and 2 adults and a terror offence.
And stay with us here on BBC News for continuing coverage and analysis from our team of correspondents in the UK and around the world.
Hello to you from a freezing cold Washington, where Donald Trump has been sworn in for a second term as the 47th President of the United States. In his inaugural address, he promised to put America first and said he'd immediately start signing orders to prevent illegal migration, encourage oil exploitation and scrap government diversity programs, moves that will delight the millions of people who voted for him and send shockwaves right around the world. Well, we're going to take a look at some of the key measures he announced on this day one of his presidency and assess what impact they might have. But first, here's Sarah Smith on how this historic day has unfolded so far.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
For Donald John Trump, this is not just a solemn oath of office. For him, this is vindication and it's victory. Welcome home, Joe Biden said, as he greeted the Trumps earlier at the White House, as it is their house now, again. There was none of this courtesy the last time when Donald Trump snubbed the Bidens and skipped town. Both men then entered the beast, the armoured presidential car, riding together, however uncomfortably, on their way to officially transfer power from one to the other. Inside the Capitol, former presidents did turn up by tradition, but his wife couldn't face it.
Present arms!
Former First Lady Hillary Clinton put on a brave face. She's the candidate Mr. Trump defeated in 2016.
The Honourable Joseph R. Biden Jr.
Joe Biden says he thinks he could have beaten him last year if he hadn't let Kamala Harris run instead and lose. And what is the collective noun for a gathering of the world's richest men? All the tech billionaires who turned up to offer enthusiastic support. Gathered inside the Capitol Rotunda that was invaded by violent Trump supporters on the 6th of January 2021. For him, it's been a long journey back to the centre of power, overcoming criminal indictments, 1 conviction and 2 assassination attempts to perform the ultimate political comeback. After all that, he was then defeated by his wife's hat. before promising to start a new era in America.
The golden age of America begins right now.
Making big promises about transforming the country.
A tide of change is sweeping the country. Sunlight is pouring over the entire world. And America has the chance to seize this opportunity like never before.
He attacked what he claimed was a corrupt and incompetent government under Joe Biden and revelled in his own triumph.
Over the past 8 years, I have been tested and challenged more than any president in our 250-year history. And I've learned a lot along the way. The journey to reclaim our republic has not been an easy one, that I can tell you. Those who wish to stop our cause have tried to take my freedom and indeed to take my life. Just a few months ago in a beautiful Pennsylvania field, an assassin's bullet ripped through my ear. But I felt then, and believe even more so now, that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again.
The promises he made on the campaign trail now being repeated in a sombre presidential tone, beginning with his signature issue.
First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border.
He got a standing ovation for the promise of a harsh crackdown on immigration.
We will drill, baby, drill.
He will also declare a national energy emergency to allow for more drilling for oil and reverse Joe Biden's climate change measures. He'll introduce tariffs on imported goods, declare there are only two sexes, which cannot change, and get rid of diversity initiatives. And then he wants to reach for the stars.
And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
It may have been with considerable relief that the Bidens then took off and left Washington behind them. Tens of thousands of Trump supporters have flooded into the Capitol, the lucky ones getting to view the action from inside a sports arena. Watching Elon Musk take to the stage, he's given himself the title of First Buddy. But he really needs to curb his enthusiasm. He's being accused of giving a Nazi salute.
Thank you.
And that's even by users on his own social media platform, X. As Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump chooses to use a more traditional salute as he formally inspects the troops. After all this ceremony, it will soon be time to get down to work. He's made a lot of big promises about transforming America and changing the world. Now he has to deliver.
Sarah, let's actually begin with the man who's just left the building across the way there, Joe Biden, issuing a number of pardons for his own family. How much of a surprise shock was that?
Yeah, this was a real surprise because it's an extremely unusual thing to do, to issue preemptive pardons. So he says, as far as he knows, they haven't done anything wrong, but he's worried that the Trump administration are going to try and investigate, possibly prosecute members of his family. So he's pardoning them in advance just in case that happens. And he did the same for some people who were in the last Trump administration and everybody who was involved in the select committee that investigated the January the 6th riots. All got these preemptive pardons.
Okay. Let's go back to the man now who has taken over the keys for the White House. A slew of policy initiatives, tough rhetoric as well, delighting his supporters.
Yes, absolutely. And very soon he'll arrive at that sports arena and speak to them in person. They've been waiting all day for that to happen. And we expect that whilst he's there, he will start signing some presidential executive orders to make happen the things he promised in his speech, including if he declares a national emergency on the border, he can then send military troops to the border, which will make a real difference. And he can probably, at the stroke of a pen, withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords as well, which he's promised to do.
All right. Sarah Smith, our North America editor, thank you for that. We're going to go straight to Gary O'Donoghue, who's inside the Capital One Arena, not far from our position here, where President Trump is due to take part in more inauguration celebrations, including the traditional parade, albeit indoors, Gary. The frigid weather forcing, 20,000 people to fill that arena. The president there effectively on another rally.
It's going to be another rally. It's going to be one of those rallies we've seen over the months and the past years, and I expect him to say all the same kinds of things. The military bands that would have been marching down Pennsylvania Avenue if it wasn't so cold are here playing right now. On the stage is the traditional podium. On the edge of the stage is a desk with a microphone and a chair and a presidential seal. We're expecting him to sign many of those executive actions and orders in front of this crowd of 20,000 people. Now, that is a moment of theatrics. It's something clearly Donald Trump wants to do among his own people. But bear in mind, even when he signs these things, presidents cannot spend new money. They cannot conjure money out of the air. That is for Congress to do. So a lot of these things will be intentions, desires, proclamations, things he wants to happen, but the signing, the actual act of putting pen to paper doesn't actually make them happen, Clive.
All right, Gary, for now, thank you for that. We'll rejoin you when the president arrives at the arena. Gary O'Donoghue in the warm there. Thousands brave sub-zero temperatures outside to get a glimpse of President Trump as his convoy moved between official events today. Many had hoped to be among the crowds watching the swearing-in ceremony on the National Mall, but the Arctic weather forced the event indoors. Tom Bateman has been talking to some of those who still ventured out to see the president.
They waited 4 years and 1 night, and in a cold as bitter as America's divisions, USA! USA! The gates opened to the dawn of Trump 2. Kimberly and John flew with their 3 daughters from Tennessee.
We feel like the person at the top is going to be relating to everything that we deal with, whether it's, safety in the community, parents in charge of their children, an economy that works, where you keep more money in your pocket.
Donald Trump got here by broadening his base. And for one day only, they filled the streets of Democrat-dominated D.C.
We want to have our borders closed, and we want to know that we're safe and not just let anybody and everybody in.
Do you think Trump can actually do this? I mean, what he's talking about would cost billions and billions, could take years. There aren't necessarily the resources to do it.
We've spent hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine. Yeah, we can 100%.
There were 250,000 tickets issued before Donald Trump moved the inauguration indoors. Now, the sports venue that these people are queuing to watch it can only take a tenth of that number, so a lot of people are going to miss out.
On the march to the far-right Proud Boys, whose leaders were jailed for sedition after the violent insurrection of January 6th. They want President Trump to free them. His opponents now warn of oligarchy and authoritarianism.
Here we go, here we go.
And as the big moment neared, crowds packed the bars to see him sworn in. How are you feeling?
Oh my. Let's go. It's the happiest I've been in a very long time. We got our country back.
The future is bright for America.
Yes, sir.
If you want to start a business, there's no better time to be an American with this man coming into office. He is going to light this economy on fire. We are going to be the envy of the rest of the world.
It's been a long time. Yes. We're ready.
A return to power for this half of America, energized by Mr. Trump's promises. They salute his second start, a presidency that now hangs on the weight of their expectation. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Washington.
Some of the delighted Trump supporters here in Washington. That's it from us here in the Capitol for the moment. We'll be back a little later, but now it's over to you, Rita, in London for the rest of the day's news.
Clive, thank you. A public inquiry has been announced by the government into the murders of 3 young girls who were stabbed to death at a dance class in Southport last year. Today, the teenager accused of killing them pleaded guilty to murder on the first day of his trial. Axel Rudakubana, who's now 18, killed 9-year-old Alice Aguiar, Elsie Stankham, who was 7, and 6-year-old BB King. He also admitted the attempted murder of 8 other children and 2 adults and a terror offence. He'll be sentenced on Thursday. Judith Moritz reports.
This is Axel Rudakabana, 18 years old and guilty of murdering and stabbing children just a few years younger than he is. He was brought to court in Liverpool for the first day of his trial, with a jury being made ready. But Rudakabana had no intention of it going ahead. His face covered, asked to confirm his name, he wouldn't reply. Told to stand, he refused to get up. But then his lawyer said he wanted to change his pleas. 16 times he was asked if he was guilty or not guilty. Muffled behind his face mask, he said guilty each time.
This was an unspeakable attack, one which has left an enduring mark on our community and the nation for its savagery and senselessness. It is clear that this was a young man with a sickening and sustained interest in death and violence. He has shown no signs of remorse.
Rudakabana murdered 3 little girls, 6-year-old BB King, Elsie Stankham, aged 7, and Alice Aguiar, who was 9. 8 other children and 2 adults were stabbed too during a Taylor Swift-themed dance class.
And I heard all the screaming, and then all the young kids come running down the road. One of them covered in, well, 4 of them were being stabbed. And he ran across to me, said I've been stabbed, thinking I'm going to die. So I just took them all in the house.
Rudakabana had left his house earlier, pacing up and down before catching a taxi. Mechanic Colin Parry saw him arrive and refused to pay the driver. He challenged Rudakabana, who got aggressive.
I said, pay the taxi, and I swore at him. I said, pay the taxi, and then he just told me to, well, he didn't. He just said, what are you going to do about it?
A picture's starting to emerge of issues within Axel Rudakabana's past. Neighbours have told us that the police visited the family home here on several occasions in the couple of months leading up to the attack. A week before the stabbing, Rudakabana tried to return to his old school on the last day of term. It's thought to attack children as they left the building. He'd booked a taxi there, but that time his father ran out and stopped him. He'd been expelled from the school 5 years earlier, having taken a knife there, which he didn't use. Dylan Pemberton's daughter was a pupil there at the same time.
My daughter had witnessed him chasing a kid with a hockey stick outside a maths class through one of the corridors, and it was apparently well known to her and her friends and to the school that he had a kill list.
After his arrest, Rudakabana was found to have a study of an Al-Qaeda training manual and the poison ricin in a box under his bed. He's not known to have a single ideology, which police say is why the attack wasn't treated as terrorism. But the teenager was referred to the government's counter-terrorism prevent programme 3 times in 3 years and was known to a range of other agencies. The government's announced a public inquiry, saying there are grave questions to answer as to how the state failed in its ultimate duty to protect the young girls. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Southport.
Emily Damari, the British-Israeli national who was released from 15 months' captivity in Gaza yesterday, is in high spirits, her mother has told a news conference in Israel. Emily was one of 3 Israeli hostages freed as the Gaza ceasefire began. 90 Palestinian prisoners were released later from an Israeli prison. The UN says that 915 aid trucks have entered Gaza today. This report from Lucy Williamson contains some disturbing images.
Israel saw this as the price for its hostages. Many Palestinians saw it as a prize for Hamas. Dozens of women and minors freed from Israeli jails last night and welcomed home with Hamas flags, waved above a jubilant crowd.
I left hell and now I'm in heaven. We are out of hell. They used to violate us, beat us, fire tear gas toward us. They used to count us while our heads were down on the floor.
At the handover of hostages in Gaza yesterday, Hamas gave each one a bag with mementos of their captivity, including a map of Gaza and a certificate of release. A public statement, like the crowds around them, designed to show a group with resources and support. The 3 women are now recovering with their families in hospital. Tonight, the mother of British-Israeli hostage Emily Damari spoke publicly for the first time.
I'm delighted to be able to tell you that Emily is in high spirits on the road to recovery. As you will have seen last night, she is an amazingly strong and resilient young woman. Please keep on fighting for the remaining 94 hostages who need to come home.
A different kind of homecoming for Palestinians in Gaza, allowed back for the first time in months to find skeletons in the rubble. Ali Ashur from Khan Yunis is looking for his son.
Even if his features are not clear and he is a skeleton, I will know and identify him, because I am a father, and I would know my son from a million people, even if his face has no features.
Some Israeli forces have begun leaving Gaza, but there's no agreed plan for how it will be run long term. This truce raises difficult decisions for Israel's Prime Minister, determined that the road to peace doesn't lead to a Palestinian state. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Back now to President Donald Trump's inauguration and to Clive in Washington. Clive.
Yeah, thanks again, Rita. We're going to show you pictures from the Capital One Arena, which are coming in. A marching band is playing, and already seated on the stage are members of the Trump family. There, his two sons up there, all waiting, along with 20,000 people, for the arrival of the new president. This effectively a rally on day one, something that he likes to do while he prepares for the beginning of what will be a colourful next 4 years in the White House. And among the executive actions announced in his inaugural address today, President Trump spoke about immigration. He's set to declare a national emergency at the US-Mexico border and has plans for large-scale deportations of undocumented migrants. John Sudworth reports now from Chicago, where he's been speaking to people fearful of the new measures.
Chicago's immigrant communities are on edge. This city is one of those singled out by senior Trump officials as ground zero for his sweeping immigration crackdown. Doris Aguirre is an undocumented migrant who's lived here for 25 years, working, paying taxes and raising a family.
I had everything in this country. I had a home, have my husband, my children, my jobs. For that, it's very sad for me, the news about the president.
We will begin the largest deportation operation in the history of the United States.
On the campaign trail, Donald Trump drove his message of fear all the way to the White House.
Illegals into our country.
But it was based on a misconception. Rather than an invasion, America has long been dependent on the work of these migrants in agriculture and manufacturing, making them both essential and dispensable. Last year, the number of deportations on Joe Biden's watch far surpassed those carried out during Mr. Trump's first term. Those protesting Mr. Trump's new executive orders in Chicago say they're used to having to fight for immigrant rights.
Some of what's been announced today is for political effect, and many of the executive orders may well be challenged in the courts, but there can be no doubting the intent. Donald Trump once said he would make people's heads spin with what he did on day one, and for his opponents these feel like dizzying and dark times.
The biggest blow to our community is living in fear. You know, when communities are living in fear, they don't go to work, they don't go to school. Long term, that has an impact not just on the immigrant communities, but it has an impact on our entire city and entire country as a whole.
It was fear that gave Mr. Trump his mandate, and in a country that once defined itself on openness, his first actions show he intends to deliver. John Sudworth, BBC News, Chicago.
I'll look at some of the comments in the inaugural address on migration there, but it was light on specifics on trade, with no mention of new tariffs on Canada, Mexico or China, for instance, something he'd promised on day one. Faisal Islam, our economics editor, is at the World Economic Forum in Davos for us now. Faisal, what's been the reaction to the prospect of tariffs where you are?
Yeah, President Trump was focused on energy dominance for America, on a golden age for Americans, understandably. But the question here for executives and financiers and other world leaders is what exactly is he going to do on world trade? Some relief about the fact that there were no specifics announced in that inaugural address. But there were some pretty choice phrases. He said that a massive amount of money will be pouring into our treasury from other countries. That's from these tariffs. Firstly, after a review of the trading relationships with Canada, Mexico and China. But some of the talk on Capitol Hill, where you are, is of hundreds of billions of dollars being raised, over $1 trillion, an unbelievable amount. And you'd have to think that that might also involve Europe if he was serious. And that is the question. How serious is he? How quickly are these going to come about? What are the consequences, not just in terms of American policy, but how other countries will retaliate? The global economy doesn't seem to be out of the woods there yet. There's hope for growth, but still question marks. Donald Trump addresses this place from the White House on Thursday.
Faisal, thank you. Faisal Islam there at that World Economic Forum meeting in Davos. We're going to take you back to the Capital One Arena here in Washington, where President Trump is walking through the crowds, just arrived. His family are already on stage. Gary O'Donoghue, our correspondent, is there. Gary, just paint a picture of the atmosphere.
Yeah, they're very excited here now, Clive. The 47th President Donald Trump has come down the stairs into the arena. He's clutching a binder, which he's waving around, pointing to, and we can only presume, I think, and certainly the crowd presumes, is that binder is full of those executive orders and those executive actions that he plans to sign in front of these 20,000 people in the next few minutes. Lined up there, his family too, even his 18-year-old son, Barron, who was a huge hit when he first came into the auditorium, the crowd chanting his name. And now they're just anticipating what they're going to hear from their new president and this new era of American politics. All these actions he's promised, he's brought them with him, and he's going to sign them right now, right here, in front of his fan base.
Indeed, he's enjoying the adulation there. What's he going to sign, do we think, Gary?
Well, there's a whole range of things we know in terms of the immigration, the southern border, this national emergency at the southern border, questions about, particularly about some of the culture war issues. The biggest cheer here earlier on, when they were watching the inaugural address at the Capitol, was when he said, we're going to bring biology, traditional biology, he said, back to the federal government. There are only two genders, he said, men and women. That got a huge cheer. So I wonder if that'll be one of the ones that he signs here today, getting rid of all those DEI, those diversity and inclusion programs in the federal government, preventing any kind of teaching in schools, all these kinds of things, preventing people participating in sports if they've been one gender beforehand. Very controversial among a huge number of the population, but among Trump supporters, incredibly popular.
All right, Gary, we'll return to you a little bit later on. A desk at the front of the stage there with the presidential seal on it and a bunch of files with those executive orders that the president is about to sign, we believe, in the next few minutes. Thanks, Gary. Well, Gary was talking there about the issue of gender, and among the blizzard of announcements today was that pledge on gender, because the president has vowed to only allow the definition of gender to be a man or a woman. He said he'd end what he called government policy of trying to socially engineer race too, as well as gender in the public and private spheres. With more, here's Ros Atkins.
The new president promised Americans a revolution of common sense.
This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life.
The Democrats would contest that that's been the goal, but the presidency's no longer theirs. And one line from Donald Trump was greeted with loud applause.
As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
The White House says President Trump will establish male and female as biological reality and protect women from radical gender ideology. Officials working with Mr. Trump also say he'll end diversity, equity and inclusion inside the federal government, stopping funding across federal agencies. Here in Washington, Donald Trump is using his new political power to reshape the government's approach to cultural issues, and others may help too. At the inauguration ceremony, in front of President Trump's cabinet, sat the most powerful tech leaders in the world. The heads of Apple, Google and Amazon were there. So was Elon Musk, who owns X and who frequently criticizes the woke mind virus. Mark Zuckerberg of Meta was there too. He recently stopped Facebook's fact-checking operation and has said the corporate world has moved away from masculine energy and is pretty culturally neutered. These men set the rules over which information is allowed and which is given prominence on some of the biggest digital platforms.
And if you want to continue watching the BBC News at 10, please turn over to BBC One, or you can watch on iPlayer. Next, it's Newsnight.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
Donald Trump hits the ground running. He declares an emergency on the Mexico border. Deportation of illegal immigrants starts now. Drilling for oil and gas will expand dramatically. Tariffs will be imposed on foreign countries. Astronauts will be sent to Mars, and he's taking back the Panama Canal. All that while claiming he'll be a peacemaker and a unifier. Can he do it? Good evening. Welcome to Newsnight. On this historic day, a golden age for the US has begun, declared Donald Trump as he took power for a second time. As you can see from these live pictures, he's currently at the Capital One Arena in DC, apparently about to sign a whole swathe of executive orders. More on that a little later. Tonight we will bring you interviews from those in the Trump camp, from Democrats and from UK political insiders who can give us insight into how the UK will approach working with a man whose ambition, amongst other things, is to cement his place in history. With us in the studio, former diplomat, now Labour MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alex Ballinger. Former UK Conservative Defence Secretary, Penny Mordaunt. And well known to you, our Newsnight audience, our former international editor, Gabriel Gatehouse, host of the Coming Storm podcast. And let me ask you all, first of all, what has been the most telling part of today for each of you?
For me, the phrase I picked up on amongst the kind of vicious and corrupt establishment that we've heard a lot about before, a phrase I've not heard Donald Trump mention before, manifest destiny. He spoke about that in the context of his intention to put Americans on Mars, but it was in the section of the kind of frontier spirit and expanding American territory. Now, manifest destiny was an ideology in the 19th century that talked about moving westwards, the kind of manifest destiny of American colonists to colonize the land, to expand the United States and, wiping out indigenous people as they went. I don't know whether Donald Trump knows what the resonance of that is, but I know that quite a few of his audience do, people on the kind of fringes of the white supremacist movement. That was a nod and a wink.
What about you, Penny Mordaunt?
Well, that's the detail. I'm going to zoom out. Optimism and hope, and I think that was very clear in the podium speeches, but also the clips that you've been showing throughout the day. Ordinary Americans down their local cafe or bar, talking about the future, and mood is critical because mood moves markets, and I think that's the most significant takeaway from today.
Yes, a huge amount of announcements during the inauguration speech, many of which would make any of my colleagues quite uncomfortable.
Like what, for example?
Well, talking about potential tariffs and climate deals and the like. But to pick one thing that surprised me possibly was the announcement that he was going to send astronauts to Mars, something I think more of us could get behind than some of the other parts of his speech.
He has kind of promised that before, actually.
Well, he's got Elon. He's the co-president.
It's easier now.
That's his main thing.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it's only easy, but...
No, it's not... No, yeah, fair enough. Caveat. Right, let's have a look at some of the moments of this significant day.
First of all, the president will declare a national emergency along the U.S.-Mexico border. I have heard certain members of MAGA world refer to today as Liberation Day.
This is one of the greatest political comebacks of all time.
Without any mental reservation.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The golden age of America begins right now. As of today, there are only two genders, male and female. And we will pursue our manifest destiny to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars. God bless America. Thank you all. Thank you.
In a moment, we're going to speak to campaign and communications advisor who worked for President Obama, Amisha Cross. But first, former White House press secretary under Trump last time around, Sean Spicer, who can share his predictions, hopefully, about how Mr. Trump might govern in his second term. Welcome back to Newsnight. And you told the New York Times you thought the next 4 years were going to be cataclysmic. What do you mean, Mr. Spicer?
Well, look, they've had 4 years to plan this. They've got the people, the process, and the policies in place. They know exactly what they do, how to do it, when to do it, and they know what they want to do. And so I think this is going to be historic. It's going to be epic. This president isn't going to waste any time, and you're seeing that literally right now, signing a historic amount of executive orders from everything from energy to trade, obviously the border and national security issues. He's hitting the ground running. He's had plenty of time to think about it, and I think it's going to be a very, very historic. In fact, I would say at this point he's on the cusp of potentially becoming the most consequential president in modern history if he can get half of what he wants to get through.
Well, he didn't last time, so it will be interesting to see what he can deliver this time. I mean, the national emergency...
But you're missing... I guess you're missing the point then. The point is that for 4 years they've had the opportunity to look at the people, the process, the policies, and say, okay, if we get another shot at it, here's how we're going to do this differently. That's, I think, when presidents go back to back, as they always have, except for one time in our history, you just keep moving forward. They've had the opportunity for 4 years to stop and think and plot how they will do things differently, and that's why I think this is very different. It's not day one in office for him. They've had a long time to think through all of this.
Understood. The emergency at the border and directing the Defence Department to seal the border, does sending troops there shout unity to you? He said he wanted to be a unifier.
Oh, absolutely. When you look at how securing the border polls, it's an 80% issue. Americans, regardless of your party, want a secure and safe border. They want to make sure that drugs don't flow into our country, that crime and criminals don't come into our communities. So this is I think this is probably one of the most unifying issues. This president ran on that, and he's delivering on it on day one. That's what the American people want.
In his inauguration speech, he didn't mention pardoning some of the January 6 rioters, but there are families gathering outside jails where some of those were convicted were sent in the expectation that he will pardon people who attacked police officers, pepper sprayed police officers, tasered police officers with their own tasers. Would you be comfortable if he did pardon those people?
Well, we'll see what he says. Yesterday I was at the rally with him. He talked about pardoning. So this is not going to be anything new. I think the big question is, and Vice President Vance spoke about this last week, there's a difference between people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time and people who may have assaulted a law enforcement person. So there's a difference in terms of what their offense was, and we'll see the scope of what the president does probably within the next hour.
Right, but if he decides to pardon somebody who's jailed for 12 years or 15 years or 20 years for attacking a police officer, I mean, would you be okay with that?
I don't condone the violence against law enforcement, frankly, against anybody, which is why I was sort of appalled that after all the Black Lives Matter protests, earlier, so few people paid any kind of consequence. So I don't condone violence ever.
Right. Let me bring in Amisha Cross. I just wonder from the Democrats' point of view, has Donald Trump changed the rules of the game so much now that if the Democrats want to win next time, they are going to have to emulate some of what Trump says, some of what he does potentially?
I think Donald Trump changed the rules in 2016, and we've continually seen in American political system that has veered further and further into not paying attention to tradition, into ignoring the norms that has made America the standard bearer when it comes to democracy. I think that for Democrats, it is one, understanding the message and the messenger, but in addition to that, what Trump has signaled is a stronghold on media, a stronghold on messaging, a stronghold on social media that I think this nation has never seen, not only when it comes to leadership, but even outside of political leadership.
But you're not suggesting that's why, sorry to interrupt, you're not suggesting that's why he won this time, are you?
No, I think that one of the main reasons why he won is because he gave an economic message, but more so because the wind was at his sails, quite frankly, because of the post-pandemic economy, where a lot of Americans and people in your home country as well have been consistently upset about where everything stood. America still has the strongest economy in the entire world, but to have people who can't afford rent is a very hard sell. And ironically, with all of the executive orders that President Trump is now saying he's going to issue, none of them have anything to do with kitchen table issues that are the main things that were supposedly the drivers of the American voter to the election in November.
Well, apart from immigration, I mean, immigration and customs enforcement officers are going into potentially your own city, Amisha Cross, Chicago, to yank out and deport people who they believe to be illegal immigrants. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that it's completely ridiculous. And back to a further point, if Americans say that they went to the polls about the price of groceries, I haven't heard a single thing from Donald Trump about reductions in the cost of everyday items. When it comes to his animus towards immigrants, it extends far beyond those who have committed crimes in this country. I don't think you'll find anybody on the left, right, or anywhere in between who will say if you have committed a crime, if you have committed a violent act, that you should not be deported. What you will find is individuals who say these are people who are contributing members of our society. These are individuals who deserve to have their day in court when it comes to those who have not had their asylum cases heard. These are individuals who need to be listened to. And what we're seeing from Trump is someone who is also pushing to sign an executive order to upend things like birthright citizenship, which he cannot do because it's constitutionally mandated.
Sean Spicer, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I hope that the Democratic Party heeds that advice, because the bottom line is that you can't be a nation of laws if you welcome people who initially break the law to come into the country. The bottom line is that if we want to be a nation that people respect and want to come in, then we have to have a legal system by which people follow that process and come into the country. Donald Trump, by the way, did mention inflation and costs today, an action that he's going to take. So, look, I think that Donald Trump was very clear on the campaign trail what he was going to promise. The other thing is, look, the candidates, both Biden and Kamala Harris, did a very poor job of articulating their side. I think neither one of them was a strong candidate. Donald Trump went out there and articulated the problems that many Americans face, whether it was the rising costs under Joe Biden of everyday items or the fear that they had of drugs and crime coming into their communities because of open borders. And the American people rewarded him for that. So not just him, by the way, we got a Republican Senate and maintained a Republican House. So voters were very clear what they wanted to get done, and Donald Trump today, I think, articulated that in his speech.
And Amisha Cross, do you accept that the Democrats could have stopped him if you'd had a better message, if you'd had a stronger message on the economy, on illegal immigration, for example?
I think the Democrats definitely needed to strengthen their messaging, but I also think that what we saw were headwinds that were seen across the globe when it came to democracies. 4 incumbent parties, most of them, actually all of them, ended up losing. So I don't think that it would have just been a messaging strategy. I think that, yes, Democrats could have definitely honed in on that a bit more. We saw what the polling was, where Americans stood when it came to things like the economy, when it came to things like immigration, and being mindful that congressionally, there has not been an immigration package that has passed in the past 4 presidential election cycles. So I don't think that that's something that is easily done, and it's definitely something that Republicans haven't done either. There was an immigration reform package on the table, and Donald Trump literally pulled the rug from under them.
Okay.
So again, I don't think that we're going to see any levels of change on that. Donald Trump just wants to showcase prowess by initiating the largest immigration retrieval process that this nation has ever seen.
Very briefly, Mr. Spicer, if offered, would you take a job in this Trump administration?
I mean, first of all, just to be clear, there's a difference between would I take one. If you're trying to get me to say would I serve, I love this country. I've served it in several ways. At this point, though, I've sort of left government service for a lot of reasons, including time with my family and financial reasons. I hope to continue to support the president and serve in some way, but not full-time in the government.
Thank you both. Thank you very much, Sean Spicer and Misha Cross. I just want to talk about Elon Musk's appearance at an earlier Trump rally. It's getting a lot of these are live pictures in D.C. at the moment. This is the Capital One Arena. Donald Trump arrived with a binder, and presumably inside are those executive orders he is about to sign. But anyway, this appearance of Elon Musk at an earlier Trump rally is getting loads of attention because of a one-armed gesture he made. So Musk thanked the crowd before placing his right hand over his heart, and then he thrust the same arm straight ahead of him into the air in a salute. Newspapers in Israel are reporting that it appeared that he made a Nazi salute. Have a look.
Thank you for making it happen. Thank you.
Well, Gabriel Gatehouse, Penny Morden and Alex Bellinger are here. How would you describe that? What did you think it was?
I mean, it was a Roman greeting, perhaps. I mean, this is precisely the kind of thing that the Trump campaign has been doing since 2016, which is to do something with a nod and a wink that some people will read exactly what they will want to read into it.
So you believe that was deliberate?
Plausibly deniable.
Right.
I don't know what Elon Musk is thinking, but it is a typical Trump move, Trump campaign move, something that's plausibly deniable and that is going to drive the libs crazy. That's exactly what we're doing here, right? This is exactly what's happening. It's getting everyone to go, oh my God, and then people go, oh, it wasn't that what you're talking about, chill out. So it's a triggering kind of thing. Remember when Hillary Clinton went mad about a cartoon frog?
Okay.
Same thing.
I don't know if Penny Morden, you describe yourself as a liberal. Perhaps you would. Do you want to comment on what you think you saw?
I don't know. I would say I would be quite surprised if it was a deliberate move. I totally agree that there's messages put in and there's particular phrases that to amplify message. But I know that Elon Musk visited Israel after the attacks on the 7th of October. I would be very surprised if that was a deliberate move by him.
Okay. What did you learn, Penny Morden, from the inauguration speech, which gives you an insight into how Trump 2.0 will be different to his first term?
Well, I'm not sure we particularly learnt anything new. We've yet to see the details in this. And I think what will happen is we will see a debate, including a debate within the Republican Party, particularly between Republicans in the Senate versus Republicans in the House, about how relevant the things that made America great in the first place are to today's America. That's sort of the values that underpin it, their role in the world, those sorts of things. So I think there's still going to be lots of interest in that. The key thing for Britain is to have a clear view about what is in our national interest, that NATO remains at the heart of European defence, that we've got an independent trade policy, that we still have control over our own regulation. These are really important things. My fear is that we're going to get a lot of incoming fire from America, lots of policy announcements, ditto for the European Union, which is now starting to get focused on reform of its single market. And what we want from the government is a clear view on what is in our national interests. And 7 months on, I don't know what Keir Starmer thinks about any of those issues.
OK. Well, do you want to... you're not necessarily here to speak on behalf of the government, but you are a Labour MP after all. Do you want to respond to what Penny Mordaunt says there?
Well, I think there was a lot of stuff in Donald Trump's speech. And as you say, he's a disruptor. He wants to change lots of things. He's putting many different issues on the table at the same time. And quite like his last term, none of us really know which of those are going to be implemented. So what's important for us is to have that good relationship with the Trump administration and have that good relationship with the American country as a whole. And I think we've done that over many years through the Conservative government and now into the Labour government. The cultural, the economic, the military ties between our two countries are very tight. I was in the Royal Marines myself. I spent more of my career, I think, in America than I did in any other places because we were doing lots of joint exercises. The team we have in Washington at the embassy there is fantastic. They've built up great links with the Trump team previously. And of course, Keir Starmer and David Lammy have spent a lot of time building those relationships, including with a dinner with Trump back in September. So lots of disruption. We don't really know exactly what's going to happen, but I think we're in a good place in terms of the relationship we have to respond and react and lobby for the best interests of our country.
OK. We'll talk about Peter Mandelson in a few minutes, if we may, and if we're in the best place there in terms of the UK. I want to ask you about this common sense revolution, which he referred to in his speech. He says he'll get rid of diversity, equity, inclusion. There'll be 2 genders, male and female. Society will be colourblind and merit-based. Does that sound like common sense to both of you two? You're a former equality minister.
Yes, it does. But I don't think that hiring someone on the basis of their talent or the content of their character is a new concept or a controversial one for the United States. I think it appeals to his base, but I think that these are sensible things. There's a growing concern about the amount of public money in particular that is spent on some initiatives. There will be other initiatives that are really important that remain. I currently am chairing a commission with John Mann on anti-Semitism. There are some schemes which should be in workplaces to ensure people aren't bullied. But I don't think we're talking about that. I think we're talking about things that don't add value.
And gender?
Yes, I mean, I think you won't be surprised that a right-wing American president has different views to a left-wing British government, and a lot of the things he's talking about are not things that I would agree with. But I think also it's important to work with international partners, whatever their views are. And I think we shouldn't be drawn too much as a Labour government into the domestic shenanigans that are happening on that side.
Gabriel, in terms of the people that were there today, when we looked at who was on the front row and just behind the front row, does it look to you, from your experience of doing the podcast, that the conspiracy theorists have won?
Well, some people who obviously do espouse certain conspiracy theories are now poised to take positions of power. We saw Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the background, who, amongst saying some very sensible things about ultra-processed foods in the US and how it's causing a health crisis and how he wants to do something about it, which makes him sort of the Chris Van Tullochen of the Trump administration, also says he believes that autism comes from vaccines for which there's no evidence, and various things about secret biological weapons programs and COVID that sort of sound fairly out there. Kash Patel, for example, the man who is nominee to lead the FBI, is on record as saying he believes the FBI is part of a deep state plot, right, and that he's going to dismantle it. So I think what we're going to see is an anti-establishment insurgent candidate with a bunch of people who may seem like they are the elite, like Elon Musk, but who have also adopted this kind of insurgent anti-establishment mantle, coming in and taking on the establishment.
Right. But they are now the establishment.
They are now
absolutely
exactly.
at the heart of it. They are billionaires with the ear of the president.
So what happens? Does he take down the establishment? Because that is essentially the mandate he's been given by the electorate, is take this establishment down. There will be all sorts of vested interests around him, and we can already see tensions between the sort of Trump MAGA 1.0, the Steve Bannonites, the sort of nativist nationalists. Let's go back to America Great Again in a kind of 1950s style. And the Johnny-come-latelys, the sort of cuckoos in the MAGA nest, the Elon Musks, the Vivek Ramaswamis, the Peter Thiel contingent, who are essentially libertarians who want to get rid of all regulation, and they have a sort of slightly different vision for this. And we can see this already causing tensions over these H-1B visas,
immigration.
which, immigration. So I think MAGA is not one thing at the moment.
Are either of you excited about some of the things that Trump talked about, or the tone in which he delivered what he said tonight? I mean, you said right at the beginning of the programme, Penny Mordaunt, he talked about hope and optimism. We could do with some of that.
I think these things are important, and they've been in short supply. And I also think, I mean, we've seen coming into this week, there's some credit due to the Biden administration on the work they did on the ceasefire, but Trump can create those moments, and his track record on international affairs has been actually quite good. So I think there are reasons to be optimistic. Clearly, I'm hopeful that there might be a good outcome in Ukraine. He is someone that does understand deterrence. I don't think Biden did. So, yeah, I think we have lots to be optimistic about.
Fair to say there wouldn't be a ceasefire right now if it weren't for Trump coming in,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
No? Yeah.
So there are opportunities here, and I want Britain to have a very clear view about the outcome it wants to see in those scenarios.
We'll talk more about that in just a moment, because we're going to talk about foreign policy a little more now with Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. They did fall out in the end, and as Trump takes power again, he faces three major conflicts: the Middle East, Ukraine, as Penny Mordaunt mentioned, and America's Cold War with China. Plus, of course, we know in his inauguration speech this evening he talked about taking back the Panama Canal. John Bolton, thank you very much for talking to us. I mean, he said he wanted to be a peacemaker, a unifier. How does that tie in with threatening to take the Panama Canal back, do you think?
Well, it doesn't, but that's because the speech, by and large, was about Donald Trump's favorite subject, which is Donald Trump. And I just think it's important to say, and for people to understand, Donald Trump does not have a philosophy. He doesn't have a national security strategy. He doesn't do policy in the same sense we conventionally understand that word. So the speech was about, as he said, America's decline stops right now. And what is the reason for that? Because he has taken office. That's what motivates Trump.
The kind of rhetoric that we heard tonight, I mean, does that not help him if he wants to keep China in its box? May help him with President Putin over Ukraine, and has, as we've just mentioned on the programme, already paid dividends in Israel-Gaza.
Well, that's if you believe that everything he says is bargaining. Let's take a look at the Middle East deal. This is Biden's deal. Biden has tried to do it for 7 months, and Israel has resisted because it's a terrible deal. Trump wanted a deal, as by analogy, he could say he was responsible for the release of hostages, as Reagan was in 1981, releasing the Iranian hostages from the American embassy. I don't think the Israelis have fully appreciated what Trump intended by this. But there's no doubt, I give full credit to this very bad deal to Donald Trump. He did something Joe Biden couldn't do, which is convince the Israelis they had to take a terrible deal.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that there are many Israeli families who've received loved ones back thinking it's a terrible deal, or indeed Palestinians in Gaza who don't have drones and bombs dropping on them.
Sorry, go ahead. Good. So let me give you my perspective on that. Obviously, the humanitarian desire of the families is real, but the terms on just this ceasefire require Israeli Defense Forces to withdraw from many positions, allow 900 Hamas adherents to be freed, and basically turn over the distribution of humanitarian supplies in the Gaza Strip to Hamas. So the future cost to Israel here could be quite large. And I think it's the ultimate goal that people don't want to talk about when it comes to Gaza, which is what to do about the Ayatollahs in Tehran, through whose ring of fire strategy with Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, terrorist militias in Iraq, has been going on since October the 7th.
Can I ask you finally, Mr. Bolton, do you think Trump will have an issue with Peter Mandelson? Does he have an issue with Peter Mandelson as UK ambassador to the US?
Well, I don't think it matters that much, frankly, and if I were the Starmer government, I wouldn't push somebody that they're obviously having trouble with. Ask Kim Durack what happened to him.
OK. Thank you. John Bolton, thanks for talking to us, former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. Nick, what are you hearing about the relationship with Trump when it comes to Mandelson at the top of the Labour government?
Well, Vic, I have to say that in the last few minutes we've heard the tune of our...
And if you want to carry on watching Newsnight, please turn over to BBC Two or watch on iPlayer.
Do stay with us here on BBC News for all the latest headlines in the US and around the world from the team here in Washington.